Hi everybody! So we've reached the point in the chapter where we're going to work on starting to use words to explain what we're doing as we do these problems. It's very important to pay attention to some of the key vocabulary and to structure your sentences the right way so that you can explain not only what you did in the problem but also why you did it. So let's start with this problem. It says graph the following equation using the slope and the y-intercept. Now we know that in order to do that, we need to rearrange this equation so that the y is by itself. So we would do that by adding 5x on both sides, which means we would get 3y equals 5x minus 12. Then we would divide by 3 to every term, and we would get y equals 5/3 x minus 4. Now this process of rearranging is to get the equation into slope-intercept form. So in our explanation we would say first, because we need to use a sequencing word, and we would say rearrange the equation to get y alone. Because, and the because here is the important part. I know that you rearranged to get y by itself, and I know that you can tell me that. The question is, can you tell me why you did that? Because the equation must be in slope-intercept form. Now there are a couple important pieces here that I want to sort of highlight for you to sort of show you the big ideas. One of them is the vocabulary. You need to say slope-intercept form because that is a vocabulary word for this specific kind of arrangement where the y is on the left and then it's mx plus b. There are also several parts to this, so we want to make sure we use a sequencing word. We say what we did, that we rearranged the equation to get y alone, because, and then why we did it. The equation must be in slope-intercept form. Now once you have the equation rearranged, to graph this you would start with the y-intercept. So let's do that next. The y-intercept of this equation would be -4. So we would place a point on the graph at the -4 on the y-axis. Let's say that now in words. So second, place a point on the y-axis at -4. And we would say because the reason we're doing that is because that is the y-intercept and it tells us where to begin. So we would say because the y-intercept is where the line begins. Now you'll notice again that this sentence started with a sequencing word and that there are some key vocabulary words that we used here. We said y-axis, we said y-intercept, and we said begins because that's where the letter B comes from when we say y equals mx plus b. So it's really important that you're using those key vocabulary terms as you're writing these sentences. Now after we graph the y-intercept, we're going to graph the slope. So our slope of this equation is 5/3, which means we're going to rise 5, run 3. Then we're going to do it again. Rise 5, run 3. As soon as we run out of room, we'll go back to the other side and try again. Down 5, left 3, but there's not enough room to do that. So let's describe what we just did. We would say third, graph additional points, which means more points, using the slope And we would say because the slope describes how to move on this graph. That's where the letter M comes from. So, what are some key vocabulary words here? We would say additional points. We're graphing more points. The slope is a key vocabulary word. And move is a key vocabulary word because we're describing how we move on the graph. Last but not least, you would just draw your line. So, here we're going to draw a line that goes through these points, that goes beyond the edges of the graph, and has arrows. So our last step is going to be finally draw the line. Okay, the second type of problem that we're going to give you to do is a problem like this one where you need to find the error that one of these students made in the graph. So the first thing that I usually recommend is that you try to figure out what you would have done if you were doing this problem. For me, I know that I would have subtracted the 2x on both sides, and I would have gotten y equals negative 2x plus 3. Now, that means that my slope is negative 2. So the line should be going downhill. Now, since this line is going uphill, that cannot be right. So we now know who was wrong. Our first step in our reasoning, in our explanation, is going to be to say who was wrong. So our first sentence would be that Julie's solution was incorrect. After you tell me who was wrong, the next thing you need to tell me is what she did wrong. So this time the sentence should start with her mistake was. Now her mistake was that she graphed a positive slope when the slope should have been negative. So her mistake was graphing a positive slope. Your third sentence should tell me what she should do instead. We call this the instead sentence. So this sentence would start with instead she should have graphed a negative slope and the last thing you need to tell me is the because. So the end of this sentence, it's still really the same sentence, we're just adding to it, because when the equation is rearranged into slope-intercept form, the slope becomes negative. My guess is Julie just forgot to rearrange her equation before she started this problem. Okay, well, that's it. We're going to practice this in class tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching and have a great night.